This is King H. Greetings to all viewers. There's a lot of shit happening, especially to black people in the United States, to black people everywhere around the world. There's a lot of shit that is happening. But I'm actually surprised how the Chinese government was talking about the racism that is happening inside the United States. Meanwhile, a couple of months ago, they were maltreating Africans in China, kicking them out from their homes because of COVID-19, which started inside China. You see, African people, we tend to react to stuff, but the Chinese people or Asians are well organized. The Europeans are well organized. Russia is well organized. The United States government is well organized. That is why it's the most powerful nation in the world. And because it is the because it's the most powerful nation in the world, China and Russia are working together and finding any possible means and every possible means to topple the United States government so that they could be on top. And this is what African people, black people, are in the midst. They're in between the Chinese, in between the Russians, in between Europeans, Britons, in between. And here in the United States, the blacks are in between the whites, and in between the Chinese, in between every other race. And they may think that because you have whites marching and protesting with them or rioting with them, think that they have the interests of the black people or the African Americans in the United States. But that's not true. You see, every human being has their own reason why they do what they do. And they do what they do because of their survival. The protests, the riots in the United States is good. It's good that it's going on. This should continue. And my hope for this riots and protests is not just only that it should end in the United States. Yes, it's moving into European countries, but it's not moving into African countries. It's slowly moving into African countries. This issue of racism is a global issue for all black people. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. This is the time, this is the moment, this is the period to raise your voice, to join a movement, a revolution, a Pan-African revolution for black people in the world. We need to find a way to come together and create an organization that is going to speak for African people, for black people. Because organizational power is what we need. The Russians are well organized. The Chinese are well organized. Many of the countries in Asia are well organized. Yes, they might show interest in what is happening in the United States to the blacks Americans. They might show interest what is happening to black people all over the world. But so long as blacks in the United States and blacks all over the world don't have a way to organize a structure of power that will be influential in the world, all these riots and protests will amount to nothing. Will amount to nothing. Thinking that by protesting and rioting will force the hands of the whites to change the institution of racism that would benefit blacks and everybody else. It's not completely true. It's not completely true. Racism will never end. Whether you like it or not, racism will never end. But we can create the tools that blacks in the world, and when I say blacks in the world, I talk about blacks in the United States, blacks in Europe, blacks in Central America, blacks in Northern America or North America, blacks in Africa. And it is already put in place. We just have to come together as a people who have been in struggle, in a continuous war for over 400 years. Blacks were taken out from Africa and brought to the United States. Blacks were colonized in Africa. Blacks were colonized by Arabs in Africa. And in many countries in Africa, there's still slavery going on in the 20th century. People are being maltreated as if they're not even human beings. And I know the African leaders, they can't do much. They're weaklings. They just want to enjoy the little that is given to them by the West, by the East, by every other non-African race. And they keep their mouth shut and say nothing. With the racism that has been going on in the United States, the African Union, presidents all over the 55 countries in Africa should have been speaking on the behalf of African Americans in the United States. But they didn't. Because they were also concerned with their own shit that is going on in Africa. But the people of Africa must take it to their heart that this is the moment to stand up and rise against racism, rise against tribalism, rise against anything that is negative to the mindset of black people over the world. Our leaders won't do it. We have to force our leaders to do it. We must create the United States of Africa and create that global pan-African government that is going to be interconnected to everywhere in the world so long as you have black people. When the pan-African government, the global pan-African government speaks against what is happening, the world will listen and tremble. We must create that organizational power for black people, without which African Americans might protest and riot this year. How long have they been having protests and riots? For like ever. And this might be the biggest one so far. But little will change. And when little will change and you see that little change and you try to go back to normal, then before you know it, it's back all over again to racism and discrimination, and you're like, why is this shit happening? It's because it can never end. Racism makes those who are in power powerful and rich. So long as blacks don't have the power and don't have the resources and the wealth to fight against racism, it will never end. You could protest from 1920 to 1820 to 2020 to 2050. It's just going to be a continuous cycle of racism, a little bit of hope, racism, a little bit of hope. It's not going to end. Racism can never end. But with an organizational power structure for black people, where black people can openly criticize and say shit that concerns them about the world and be influential in the world. Without that, There is no hope to end racism. There is no hope to reduce the amount of racism that is in the world. Every day people learn, but there are certain things that do not change when it comes to people. Certain things. People have been saying that, oh, the old ones will die and racism will end. But the more that happens, there are still others that still learn racism who are still young and will continue to apply racism to the world, being it the Chinese, being people from Asia, being it people from Europe, and whites in the United States. Racism will never end. Blacks must put themselves in an organizational power that would speak to what is happening and then try to change the racism. Pan-African, global Pan-African government must be created. Countries all over the world where you have black people must have a structure. Because China is a powerful country. Russia is a powerful country. And the Russians are very racist. The Chinese are very racist. That's not going to go away. Even 100 years from now, 200 years from now, 300 years from now, it's not going to go away. Whites in Europe are very racist. That's not going to change. The fact that they're matching with you, that they are with you, doesn't mean that it's going to change. Because there's going to be somebody that is still going to continue to do racist act towards black people. Take, for example, the way George Floyd was killed. Many whites are copying that and showing everywhere on Facebook, making a mockery at his life. Making a mockery at a black man that was killed by a white man. Do you think those kids don't know what they're doing? They do. And do you think they would change their character from there? No, they would not. It's gonna be continuous until we have a structure of power, not depending on whites, Asians, Indians, or whatever race. Blacks must learn to depend on blacks and grow the wealth from the resources that they have. How do China, Russia, Britain, France, the United States, how do they gain their wealth? By going to the richest continent in the world. By going to the richest continent in the world and obtain the resources that they need. The Chinese are there, the Americans are there, the Britons are there, the 500 billion US dollars taken out of 14 countries, French African countries, by France. And then if you want to look at the aid that they give back and you say they're giving money, they're taking so much money and then they give you little change. But if blacks in the United States decide now to do business with Africans on the continent, the wealth will grow exponentially to the point where blacks will have more influence. There will be more millionaires and billionaires that will be able to change the outcome and the situation of black people in the world. President Trump said it. He said his friends, his white friends, leave and go to Africa, and in a couple of years they are rich. Why is that? But to the Africans on the continent, this is the time, this is the moment, this is the period to stand against any leader that is against Pan-African revolution, that is against Pan-African unity, that is against the growth and strength of The African people, many of African leaders have been in power for so long, killing their people to stay in power while getting support from the West and the East to do what they do. And then the people are the ones suffering. China is not in Africa to make the African people rich. No, they're there to make themselves rich from the continent of Africa. Why do you think the people of Hong Kong are fighting so hard to get rid of the institution that has been put in place by the Chinese? Why? So that they could have a control, they could be masters of their own fate. They are not in control of Hong Kong. The Chinese people are in control of Hong Kong, and the Hong Kong people are not in control of their own nation. And because of that, they are like slaves in their own country. And that is what the Chinese is bringing to Africa. And they are laughing at the racism that is happening in the United States. Meanwhile, they are the most racist people in the world. I see some people I saw a picture or so from Iran, how they have the picture of George Floyd. But Iran is also freaking racist towards black people. People like the Arabs in general are very racist. They pour acids on black people, deform their faces. They treat blacks who go and work in any of the countries in Arabs as slaves, as servants. But what do you see? It's like the whole world is fighting for George Floyd. Do you think they have the interest? No. Many of those countries want to topple the United States because the United States is the most strongest nation in the world. They have their own interests. Everybody has their own interests. Why they're doing what they're doing. If blacks in the United States are not careful, by the end of this riot and protest, when everything is settled down, they might give a little just to control. Many of the policemen and women have been kneeling down to show that they are part, or at least they show sympathy of what is happening in the United States. That's just a show business. At the end, blacks in the United States might not still achieve anything. I mean, for a period after the riots and protests, the rate at which they were killing blacks will reduce. Then at one moment, it's going to pick back up. Because it is what it is. Blacks in the United States depend on whites. Blacks in Africa depend on Western influence, which is why our African leaders are always kissing the butts of whoever gives them money. Russia gives them money, they go and bow. China gives them money, they go and bow. India gives them money, they go and bow. It's ridiculous. The African youth must step up and protest. The entire Africa must protest and riot against the government of Africa because they don't have the interests of the youth of Africa. Only through an organizational structure of power known as the United States of Africa and a global Pan-African government where you connect, where you have blacks all over the world in a structure where when a president in Jamaica comes and speaks in that government, the world listens. Where blacks in the United States come and speak in that government, the world listens. we all black people are fighting to destroy racism, but racism will not end if we don't have power to execute it. And if we think we can depend on whites, on Chinese, on Indians, on non-blacks to give us that power to end racism, then you are fooling yourself. Then you are fooling yourself. To end or to reduce racism in the United States and to reduce racism all over the world, blacks must have a voice, a strong voice. Must create the avenue, the pathway, must create the institution needed to speak with a solid, strong voice as Pan-Africanists. That is the key that we need to change the outcome of black people in the world. Without which, it ain't gonna change. Nothing will change. Blacks must stand for blacks. And you may think that the whites who are marching with you, protesting with you, are with you. Well, you are fooling yourself. They have their interests. They all have their interests. And remember, many whites are angry with the government. So they have their interests. But then again, this is King H. I'm just rambling. Till next time.